Good morning. I'm Denise Perot. I'm a longtime Boulder textile artist who often uses reclaimed material in my work. I'm also a certified master reuser through the Reuse Alliance and the founder of Boulder's future creative reuse center called Art Parts. How I wish the word future didn't have to be included and I could instead be giving you a tour of the vibrant place we've planned for Boulder County. After the September floods, I also wished that we had a space. We could have provided a valuable waste diversion option for many of the reusable items that were added to the mountains of trash that filled whole parking lots where the city had placed dumpsters in affected neighborhoods. Granted, lots of it was soak carpeting and padding, but a lot of it was perfectly fine, or just needed the mud cleaned off, or a place to dry out. It's curious how the flood affected our relationship with our stuff. When so many of us had to haul furniture, possessions, and heavy sodden boxes full of extra stuff up from basements and out of first floors, garages, crawl spaces, and storage units, and then somehow deal with it all while the water subsided, or the carpeting was ripped out and replaced, it forced us all to reassess how much of our stuff was really important and how much of it was a burden, both physically and emotionally. Unlike fires, which we do have experience with, but reduce our stuff to ash, we experienced in a way that we never have before just how much superfluous stuff we keep under our roofs. Our stuff contributed in no small way to our flood fatigue. Consequently, Boulder County's thrift stores were swamped with donations after the flood. As a way to learn the reusables business, I volunteer at our local Greenwood Wildlife thrift store. We received so many donations since the flood that we can barely squeeze into our intake room. Some thrift stores posted signs banning any more donations until further notice. Even our resource deconstruction yard had to be more particular about what they would accept, just to keep the sheer volume of donations down to a manageable level that could be stored inside before winter. Consider that landfills fill up rapidly, so that new ones must constantly be created. And it takes a long time for a landfill to become usable space again. It becomes clear that landfills alone are not a sustainable means for dealing with our increasing mountains of trash in a rapidly growing population. It's not surprising that so many residents donated to thrift stores as a way to find reuse options for their stuff. Resource conservation is an issue most Boulderites are so passionate about that it's helped us earn a national reputation as a green city. Part of that started right here at CU when it launched one of the first campus recycling programs in the country in 1976. EcoCycle, our traditional recycling facility, began that same year, and it too was one of the first recycling programs in the country. And it continues to be the largest nonprofit recycling facility in the nation. That's why Boulder's waste diversion rate is more than double our state average of 21%, though that's pretty low when you compare it to the national average of 34%. EcoCycle also operates a popular Green Star school program which diverts 2/3 of all waste from the 34 schools that participate, with more schools waiting to sign on. Boulder's zero waste resolution has helped raise our residential waste diversion to 57%, and that's with the addition of single-stream recycling and composting. And free plastic bags were banned from retail outlets in July. The city is also creating a 10-acre waste diversion hub called Recycle Row at 6400 Arapahoe in East Boulder. And no doubt that will help raise our waste diversion rates too, particularly if a creative reuse center is part of the mix. So right now, Boulder is diverting just over half of our total waste from landfills, while cities like San Francisco, Portland, and San Diego divert 60 to 77% of their waste. By the numbers, Boulder has lost its edge as a model green city, and it appears that our roughly 1,400 Boulder County businesses are to blame. They create most of the waste, but divert just 17% of it through recycling. That's why EcoCycle, our county trash hauler, Western Disposal, and our zero waste advocates are encouraging the city to prioritize commercial recycling through regulation. While this will prompt some businesses to recycle more, we doubt it will be enough, because it's all that other stuff that businesses are forced to toss out that Art Part sees as the larger issue. It's those vast amounts of excess in the form of unsold and outdated merchandise, outdated office supplies, seconds, samples, rejects, recalls, byproducts, overruns, prototypes, models, trim waste, etc. Most of this is not accepted by traditional recycling because there's a lack of end markets that can use those recycled raw materials to make new products. So even if we make laws requiring more vigilance in recycling glass, papers, plastics, metals, and organics, those huge amounts of non-recyclables will still be a problem. The local company where my husband works for over 30 years is a good example. Innovative Openings manufactures sophisticated window treatments. For years, I've watched with dismay as dumpsters were filled with sample books like this, full of beautiful fabrics and trim, as well as wide yardage fabrics like $180 a yard Italian brocades left over from high-end jobs in Aspen or Telluride. Owner Rick Pease disliked throwing away reusable surplus, but he had no choice. They didn't have the space to store the old samples in surplus, and the thrift stores wouldn't take it either because they too lacked space for such large and bulky items. His employees didn't have the time to find artists like me to take it away, nor could he afford to pay an employee to cut the fabric out of these big sample books so that at least the heavy cardboard covers could be recycled. So my husband would let me know when a bunch of fabric books and samples were about to be tossed, and I'd call the other textile artists I knew who would be willing to pick up that stuff ASAP. Rick was pleased because he saved money on his trash hauling fees, he had more usable space in his warehouse, and he generated goodwill amongst the textile artists that he donated to. Innovative Openings' reputation as a conscientious green business was also heightened, and that matters to us Boulderites, because the artists talked about their fabric source when they sold their items in public, which, by the way, made the textile art created by those artists more affordable and therefore easier to sell because the raw materials were free. Innovative Openings was my inspiration for starting Art Parts, because they made me realize that a lot of other local companies must also be burdened with large amounts of non-recyclable surplus. One of their window treatment suppliers, the multi-billion-dollar company Hunter Douglas in Broomfield, has the same problem on a much larger scale. They have so much excess, like dozens of rolls of this high-tech polyester fabric, that they have to rent a giant warehouse off-site just to store it all. If they can't give it away to the community, they pay China approximately 4 cents a pound to take it off their hands. They deserve a lot of credit for their commitment to not throwing reusables into dumpsters. Yet despite their great generosity to the community, surplus is still piled to the ceiling in some parts of their warehouse, because few of us own trucks that can accommodate a fat 16-foot long bolt of fabric. While these two companies are unique to our region, there are thousands of examples of non-recyclables that are also national issues. Take the ubiquitous binder, for example. Boulder County businesses throw out thousands of reusable binders annually because EcoCycle can't accept them. Our thrift stores won't take them in any quantity either because they take up too much space on a sales floor that first is already too crowded, and secondly, only devotes about 7% of its total sales floor to art, craft, school, and office materials. We learned this through surveying Boulder County's thrift stores in 2011, and it's probably a good estimate for other thrift stores all around the country. Have you ever tried taking a binder apart so that you can recycle the inside cardboard and the metal spine? Impossible. If you could separate the spines from the metal so that it could be recycled, businesses would have to devote employee hours and transportation to delivering that metal to Boulder's hard-to-recycle materials facility, or CHARM, where they have to pay a fee for every delivery. That metal would then be shipped out of state to a remanufacturing metals plant where more labor, resources, and energy would be needed to melt it down. The metal would then be shipped to a binder factory to be made into new binders, all of which takes yet more time, resources, and transportation. When 68% of all domestic products are shipped by truck around the country, that's a lot of added CO2 to the atmosphere. Once these new binders are produced with their new cardboard covers, they're stuffed into new cardboard boxes and delivered around the country a fourth time, burning up precious resources once again. So now multiply Boulder's thousands of toss binders annually by every other city in the country. That's millions of perfectly good binders going into landfills every year, all because we lack the facilities to collect and resell them. Like this one, I bought at Greenwood Wildlife Thrift Store for 50 cents. Students in Boulder spend between $7 and $15 for a new binder. My Boulder High sophomore needed 5 of these this year. Total cost from the thrift store, $2.50 plus tax. Total savings to my community and the planet, priceless. So while traditional recycling is vital to resource conservation, it's very labor and resource intensive. And it's challenging to find viable end markets for things like plastic bags and the plastic clamshell food containers. Reuse, on the other hand, needs no additional processing. It's more efficient on every level because reuse has value as is. And its end market is us, the local residents. That's why the reuse sector is the fastest growing segment of the recycle industry in the country. By collecting these items and making them available to others instead of reprocessing them, reuse organizations save enormous amounts of time, money, energy, and resources. In broader economic terms, reuse offers quality products to people and organizations with limited means, all while generating green jobs, sales tax, and business activity that contributes to our local economy. And it's the biggest job creator of all recycling concerns. According to a 2012 EPA report, 1 job is created when 10,000 pounds of material are sent to an incinerator. 6 jobs are created when that same amount is trucked to the landfill. 36 jobs are created when it's recycled, and between 28 and 296 jobs are created when it's recycled. Excuse me, reused. That's why reuse has triple bottom line benefits for products, people, and planet. There are all kinds of subsets in the expanding reuse sector, like companies selling just used office furniture or used cardboard boxes. There's free online exchanges and free tutorials for digital repair like iFixit.com. Yet creative reuse centers are growing faster than all of them, not just because we offer a common sense solution for increasing amounts of commercial surplus. Have you noticed that craft making has become hip again? According to a 2011 Craft and Hobby report, Americans spend more than $29 billion every year on craft supplies. A recent Parade magazine article attributes this to the hours we spend at our computers, producing little that's really tangible, so that we yearn to make something creative and tactile. Unlike overpriced, overpackaged craft stores who all sell the same stuff, creative reuse centers offer a much more interesting variety of items, all at 50 to 90% off retail prices. Craft stores also lack an essential and beloved element of creative reuse centers, that patina and silent history of things used and loved. That's why millions of us prefer to use discarded items over new in our artwork. Discarded objects possess layers of stories, memory, time, nostalgia, and references which add meaning to our work. Luckily, we have almost 50 creative reuse centers, or CRCs, to look to for best practices, and some have been around for more than 40 years. Credit San Francisco with the vision to open the first scrap or Scrounger Center for Reusable Art Parts in 1976. Scrap and 16 other creative reuse centers have helped California earn the highest waste diversion rates in the country at 77%. Oregon comes in second with a 70% waste diversion rate, thanks in part to their own scrap in Portland, which last year diverted over 140 tons of waste from the landfill, as well as the 2 other creative reuse centers in Oregon. In general, states with the highest waste diversion rates have the most public creative reuse centers. Florida is the standout anomaly. They divert just 28% of their waste, yet operate 25 creative reuse centers, more than any other state. Maybe it's because more than half of these are private facilities open only to teachers, so their customer base is much smaller. Otherwise, creative reuse centers are providing positive, measurable conservation benefits across the nation. In 2012, they diverted approximately 2,000 tons of waste from landfills around the country. That number will continue to rise as new facilities are opening almost monthly. Unfortunately, most of them don't have the space needed to accommodate all the surplus that businesses want to donate. So this number could be a lot higher if their facilities were larger. Last week, Kentucky opened its first creative reuse center in Louisville called Good Garbage. And Washington, D.C. has a brand new scrap affiliate downtown. Imagine all the decommissioned government binders that city must have. You might think that 2,000 tons isn't large enough to have any impact at the landfill. But you have to remember, it's not just their weight that gives them value. It's all the resources and raw materials that have to go into producing and transporting new versions of that very same stuff that gives it value, and the value to the community in repurposing those things. The variety of business models that creative reuse centers function under also benefit their communities beyond waste diversion numbers. Repurposed Materials near Denver, for example, specializes in large industrial surplus. They've moved twice since they opened in 2001 to increasingly larger buildings. And they're even opening a second facility in Chicago just to keep up with the national demand from both industries and individuals. RAFT in Denver, or Resource Area for Teaching, and its 4 affiliates in California are nonprofit private organizations that charge a yearly membership fee for a limited group, like teachers. They all provide teacher training, idea workshops, and even student kits geared towards STEM topics. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. Teachers and their students are big beneficiaries of creative reuse centers, not just because they supply the class size quantities needed at low prices, but because they offer a treasure trove of interesting, inexpensive materials where students can indulge in creative problem solving and other practical skills. Because of this, a number of creative reuse centers are fiscally sponsored by their school districts, as Scrap in San Francisco is. What a coup this model would be for Colorado teachers, since we rank 41st in the nation for school spending. This forces our Colorado teachers to spend between $500 and $1,000 of their own money every year on school supplies. No wonder Boulder County teachers have told us they want art parts to open yesterday. Some creative reuse centers are supported by their waste management entities, like Tools for Schools in Florida. But most are nonprofits that operate independently to serve the public, as art parts will, and most offer extras like classroom presentations, art making workshops for kids and adults, teacher training, make and take birthday parties, summer camps, school tours to teach kids about the importance of reuse, and art galleries selling local upcycled artworks. Art Parts will provide these services too, and in the process, create between 10 and 18 green jobs for our residents. What creative reuse centers all have in common is their affordability, their unique inventory in large quantities, their huge popularity in the areas they serve, and a wide demographic, from teachers, students, and other nonprofits, to artists, crafters, interior designers, do-it-yourselfers, bargain hunters, collectors of all sorts, and families who nationally spend over $600 of their own money every year on school supplies. Most creative reuse centers even provide free pickup of industry surplus from businesses, and the high quality and originality of their surplus offsets the pickup cost for the creative reuse centers. Also, most businesses tend to balk when you ask them to pay a pickup fee for their expensive donated materials. So, if I were giving you a tour of Art Parts today, and that 10,000 square foot dream facility was realized, this is what you'd see. A fantastically eclectic, kid-friendly place from all eras, where the counter is a massive old saloon bar and the vintage tins and baskets are displayed in a 1950s turquoise refrigerator. The building is built from surplus shipping containers with all the modern green building efficiencies that reclaimed materials could provide. A vast array of donated industry and individual surplus, much of it available no place else, fills aisles and shelves because local businesses like Ball Aerospace and the National Center for Atmospheric Research use really interesting and cool, expensive and high-tech materials. It looks nothing like a thrift store because the merchandise is neatly organized by raw materials such as glass, plastics, metals, woods, and naturals like shells, seeds, and carved marbles. There are shelves of broken toys and incomplete games and puzzles, fiber arts like fabric, antique furs, and basketry supplies, and other interesting stuff. It's all the stuff too small or unsuitable for the deconstruction yard and too large or unusual for the thrift stores. This helps us all to view the mundane beyond its original intentions, and that's very important. The mere fact that the aluminum scroll from an old screen door isn't in the door section, but instead in with this amazing variety of shaped metals, pushes the right side of our brain right out of the box and into that inspired space of creative possibilities. That's essential in solving modern challenges of all sorts. Many artists have noted that there's something deeply liberating about working with reclaimed materials. Because if something is essentially trash, you don't have to worry about its cost or rarity. There's always more of it. So real creativity is able to emerge. The act of making becomes available to the amateur as well as the professional. Children quickly learn that those little plastic army men are a texture as well as a toy. And off those neuron connections go towards all the things that are familiar in their lives that suddenly, exhilaratingly, have multiple purposes. Assemblage art becomes an inexhaustible joy because there are unlimited combinations to work with and speak through. Old school carbon paper becomes a history lesson with a satisfying art element that engages young hands, which helps that lesson stick to their brains. The definition of art material loses all boundaries. Because plastic newspaper bags are now the colorful warp for weaving insulating shades, and newspaper makes so much more than paper mache. This is mind-expanding stuff that not just feeds our self-esteem and our souls with the satisfaction of creation, but they train us to approach challenges in fresh, innovative ways. Because creative reuse centers also provide industrial-sized quantities of materials that wouldn't otherwise be available or affordable, the possibilities for large public art installations and street art greatly increases. Someone can make a cute pair of earrings out of 2 metal pet tags from animal control, for example, but just imagine what they could create with 200 metal pet tags or 2,000. It's the possibilities inherent in unlimited combinations of stuff from all eras that makes reuse so exciting. Like creative reuse centers, found object art is the fastest growing art genre in the world. Writer Raphael Rubinstein commented last year that artists who restrict themselves to traditional materials are in the minority. So let's look at some of the world's most influential artists in this genre. As you can see, art made from repurposed materials goes by many names, but they do have their singularities. Upcycled art, for example, usually refers to art made from items that could have been traditionally recycled, so glass bottles, metals, plastic. Bricolage, assemblage, reclaimed, found object, these terms are all loosely interchangeable unless a famous artist has laid claim to one in particular, like Joseph Cornell and his assemblage boxes, because he was a pioneer of that genre and he deserves to own that term. The term found object seems to be the preferred term by most people around the world, as it has by far the most web links at over 10 million. That gives you an idea of how popular that genre is too. The term visionary is sometimes used to describe metaphysical art, but I reserve that term for art made by untrained or self-taught artists like myself, those compelled to create, and usually with the bricolage. It also goes by outsider or tramp art. Trashion refers to fashion made from used clothing and other reclaimed accessories. And those clothing designers take no offense to that term. What is offensive to many artists is the term trash art, because that sounds like bad art. And the term junk art is only mildly better. There are many important dead artists who use found objects in their work, like Picasso in the 30s, Joseph Cornell in the 40s, and Robert Rauschenberg in the 60s. And they've all had their impact on the artists who came after them. The images we're going to show here today largely concentrate on living contemporary artists, because this is the kind of work that we would display in our bricolage art gallery. Bricolage, by the way, is a French word with many interesting references to sociology, architecture, music, engineering, and art. It's a common word in Europe, and it basically means using the materials at hand. So let's start with some of the most influential found object artists from outside of the U.S. El Anatsui is an internationally known artist from Nigeria who uses tabs, liquor bottle tops, and aluminum bottleneck wrappers to create these shimmering, visually sumptuous cloths on a grand scale. He says, "I believe artists are better off working with whatever their environment throws up." This has been happening in Africa for a long time, whereas you in the West have developed professional materials. Working with such things would not be very interesting to me. David Mock. He's a London sculptor who describes himself as a materials junkie who likes to work with as many different materials as possible. This is king silver on the left, and that's completely made from coat hangers. The installation on the right is called Fuel for the Fire and is created from thousands of carefully placed magazines and used furniture. Tim Noble and Sue Webster are a married couple from London who stretch their obsession with bricolage by shining the shadows of their sculpture onto the walls with a slide projector, essentially creating two very different art pieces, one which is haphazard and one which is as precise as their very own silhouettes. Ha Schult is a German artist who's considered an eco-pioneer for his art happenings made entirely of trash. He installs these 1,000 trash people at landmarks all over the world to call attention to our conspicuous consumption. These people are made entirely from cans and electronic waste. Vic Muniz is a Brazilian and Brooklyn artist. He's familiar to anyone who's seen that documentary about his art piece called Wasteland. He befriended these people and others who make money in Rio de Janeiro's dumps by collecting cans and bottles. And then he photographed them at work. Then he blew up these photographs, he placed them on a floor of a big warehouse, and he had trash dumped on top of those photos, which they then worked together to artfully arrange on top of those portraits. Vic says the project revealed to him that trash as art is a transformation because the people involved regained their self-respect in a novel, artful, and meaningful way. Louise Saxton. She's an Australian artist with a very, very feminine oeuvre. She creates these large textile mosaics from vintage doilies, handkerchiefs, and lace remnants, which she pins to sheer bird netting and hangs from the ceiling so that they appear to just float in space. They are, she says, a creative reincarnation of discarded treasures. Creating these allows her to rescue them from obscurity and to keep women's work alive in another form. She appreciates the feeling of taking something small and insignificant from the past and amplifying it in this way in the present. Duggar Petter. She's a Danish artist who uses rolled up newspapers and hemp to weave portraits and large pictures. Her work has a very appealing tactile quality that's in very high demand, perhaps because it's a familiar substance to us and used in such an intriguing way. If you go to Santa Fe, you can see her work at the Jane Sauer Art Gallery. She says she likes working with newspaper not just because it's the diary of our lives, but because it's its limited color palette. Don't ever call her work recycled or trash art because she will take offense. She never refers to it that way, she doesn't regard it that way, and she doesn't want it identified in those terms. One of my favorite artists. This is Choi Jung-hwa. He's a South Korean artist who employs reclaimed materials with this joyful exuberance. He believes that art can be created by anyone with anything. And he proves that with this amazing breadth of materials he uses. From old doors and plastic basins to fake Korean traffic cops. This piece is called Gather Together, and it decorated the Seoul Olympic building in 2008. It's made entirely of strung plastic objects donated by over 10,000 South Korean citizens. He says plastic is one of his favorite art materials because it's waterproof, one, and that even when it's old, it looks new. All right, next we're going to take a look at our national artists, starting with Yukon Tsuruya, who is a New York artist who was born in Japan. He's best known for these delicate cut paper artworks from fast food packaging. We all recognize that bag, right? So this is his way, he says, of referencing consumer culture through a very traditional craft technique. They're exquisite. Guerra de la Paz is a composite name for Cuban-born artists Alain Guerra and Geraldo de la Paz, and they live in Miami. Their work also references consumer culture, but on a much, much larger scale. This is all cast-off clothing that they use to build these large installations. We've probably all heard of Chris Jordan. He's the San Francisco artist or Seattle artist. He seems to move around a lot. And he's been called the it artist of the green movement. His photographic art gives us powerful visual assistance in grasping the sheer numbers of our rampant throwaway consumerism. This piece is called Cap Seurat. He's replicated George Seurat's famous painting, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte, with 400,000 plastic bottle caps. This represents the number of plastic bottles that we use in the United States every minute. Every minute. Batir Sarr. She's an influential black assemblage artist from Los Angeles. And she uses these stereotypical African-American images from folk culture and vintage advertising to create these very provocative statements about racism and slavery. This piece is entitled Liberation Jemima. On a much lighter note, Pee Wee Herman fans will recognize the wildly imaginative LA artist Wayne White as the Emmy-winning designer and puppeteer of Pee Wee's Playhouse. In his marvelous documentary called Beauty is Embarrassing, he points to this pile of junk on his studio floor and he says, "This is what makes me happy, a pile of junk." Among the many reclaimed art genres that Wayne works with are these mass-produced lithographs that he gets from thrift stores, and he calls them word paintings. This one says, "Good-looking people having fun without you." Having fun without you. New Jersey artist Sue Beatrice isn't one of those artists who hits us on some deep intellectual level, but she is the queen of her particular constructivist approach to discarded watches and medals. Her sublime small creatures show absolute mastery of her materials, and they're passionately collected around the world. Federico Uribe, is, in my opinion, one of the most popular, talented, repurposed materials artists in the country. He's a Colombian-born artist living in Miami who transforms an incredible variety of objects, such as shoes, laces, pencil stubs, paper clips, and plastic forks, into these jaw-droppingly clever sculptures and installations. His highly imaginative pieces have earned him a huge global following, and they come with fat price tags. That's $50,000 and up, and you can see why. Wisconsin artist Simon Sparrow. He's the only dead artist in our talk, but I had to include him because he was a true visionary artist with this exuberance so unfettered that even the Smithsonian Institution owns a piece of his in their permanent collection. Shaniqua Smith is a New York City artist who creates art installations from tightly wrapped bundles of discarded textiles that she gets from thrift stores. They're inspired by the bales of clothing that we send to third world countries, and they provide commentary, she says, on how things possess us. I like the fact that she was expelled from high school for a lack of conformity and graffiti. Tom Deininger. He's a Rhode Island bricolage artist whose large 2D works of these lush, unspoiled nature scenes are jarringly juxtaposed with the close-up view that you see on the right, which reveals the broken toys, old wires, and the detritus of the modern world that he paints with. They're a beautiful yet sobering comment on the degradation of the natural world due to excess consumerism. World-renowned California assemblage artist Aaron Kramer's credo is, "Trash is the failure of imagination." His sculptures employ surprising found elements in simple but expertly rendered ways, such as these orbs on the left, made from street sweeper bristles that he would collect in the streets of Chicago early in the morning. Or this wine cork chair to the right, which I wonder if he collected all by himself. We're probably all familiar with Nick Cave since he had that wonderful show at the Denver Art Museum earlier this year. He's from Chicago, and he's best known for these spectacular sound suits that are made from all manner of thrift store finds. His work explores the global destructiveness of our consumer society through the use of over-the-top ornamentation that to me is reminiscent of a Baroque style. He says that each piece embodies his 3 R's of environmental consciousness: reverence, reevaluation, and reclaim. Tyree Guyton is a visionary artist whose street-long Heidelberg project in Detroit has become a major tourist draw in the city. Like a true visionary, he was compelled to create beauty from the abandoned homes and trash on Heidelberg Street, which has been his lifelong home. He inspires many for his belief that beauty exists in everything. Dimitros Sislyak from Detroit. He's a visionary artist with assembly and obviously assemblage experience from his years working on the assembly line at the General Motors Hamtramck plant in Detroit. This is a 30-foot tall, light-up kinetic piece that was built with found objects over 8 years above 2 garages behind his house. And it's another tourist attraction in Detroit. The locals call it Hamtramck Disneyland. Another favorite artist of mine. Teresa Agnew is a Wisconsin textile artist who created this moving piece. It's called Portrait of a Textile Artist. It's 8 by 9 feet wide, and it's a portrait of a Bangladeshi textile worker. The fact that it's made from 30,000 clothing labels from U.S. manufacturers makes a powerful social and political statement about those clothing manufacturers and the downside of Americans' excess consumer culture in countries beyond our borders. Leonardo Drew. He's a world-renowned African-American assemblage artist based in New York. These dynamic sculptural installations are created with a wide range of found materials, which he finds is an apt medium for his exploration into the cyclical nature of creation, decay, and regeneration. His work has been exhibited in many important museums around the country, and he's a major force in the found object art world. This is not him, by the way. This is just a spectator for scale. Vince Hanneman used to run the Austin, Texas Recycling Center. In time, he brought home nearly 40 tons of discarded stuff to create this cathedral of junk. The city almost shut down what has now become a tourist attraction when it began to spill over into his property easement. But local lawyers and volunteers came to his aid to make it all legal and lasting, which says a lot, I think, about the popularity of public art made from this discarded materials. No word, though, on whether his neighbors tipped off the police about the easement issue. Another favorite artist, Sayaka Gans. She's a Japanese-born assemblage artist from Indiana who only select objects that have been used and discarded. She says, "My goal is for each object to transcend its origin by being integrated into an organic form that is alive and in motion. This process of reclamation and regeneration is very liberating to me as an artist." It's hard to believe, isn't it, that these profoundly beautiful pieces are made from used plastic utensils. Finally, here are just a few of our Colorado artists using found objects. Another unofficial tourist stop in America is Jerry Simpson. He's known for his bricolage artworks, but also his home and studio, which is filled to the rafters with this amazing variety of found stuff. And interestingly, it's all very neatly organized in these beautiful little boxes because he wants to be able to find that one item that will provide the inspiration for his next piece. Brenda Stumpf is a nationally known Denver artist whose found object sculptures like these have a very nice minimalistic sensibility that many collectors really are drawn to. Janice McDonald is a prolific Denver collage artist with a national reputation. Since paper is easy to work with and requires minimal equipment, this is an assemblage art genre chock full of competition. Her pieces have a refined elegance that really makes her work stand out in the crowd. Jimmy Descant is a Salida visionary artist who describes his work as severe deconstructivist. He favors the discarded bits from manufacturing's golden age for their vintage industrial details that he uses to create large and compelling sculptures of rockets, Native American imagery, and social commentary. People follow him for his biting humor and satire, which can often be found in his pieces. Donald Cano Espinoza is a Native American visionary who has spent over 30 years.
I don't know what happened.
Nuts.
Oh, nice.
Cool. He spent 30 years building this found object environment, which he calls Jesus's Castle. It's many buildings on this one property that just gleam with all the stuff that it's made out of. Hubcaps, bike reflectors, windows, doors, and over 100,000 cans. It's included on the must-see list of many road trips about Colorado. Look him up because you'll enjoy that piece. Crestview View Elementary School art teacher Jessica Moon Bernstein is also a boulder assemblage artist who works largely with discarded inner tubes, tires, and plastic bags. She favors the stuff that does not decompose. Through these, she attempts to express the increasing impacts of mass production and consumerism on ethnic cultures in particular and the environment. My inspiration, she says, rises from the mundane materials we discard, recomposing what in nature may never decompose. This image is from an installation at the Boulder Contemporary Art Museum 2 years ago called Our Rubberos. It's a variation, she says, of the word Ouroboros, which is that ancient symbol of the serpent eating its own tail. Patricia Chapman is a longtime 3D assemblage artist whose national reputation followed her from Santa Barbara to Boulder some years ago. She loves working with objects, she says, because they have a heavy associative value and a power, presence, and personality that nothing else has. They allow her to indulge her quirky sense of humor through metaphorical potential, and the finished product is always expertly wrought. She told me the last time we spoke, that she really missed her Santa Barbara Art from Scrap Creative Reuse Center, and she's really looking forward to Art Parts opening. Russell, who is in our audience this morning, and his artwork also adorns the walls around here this weekend. His work is created in his 3D studio, brimming with an astonishing collection of vintage Americana, collectibles, fabrics, old toys, and what he calls tchotchkes that he uses to create some very beautiful and rich imagery inspired by original acronyms such as ART, Arrange Reality Tastefully. Karen Mandry is a Boulder artist whose keen wit is exposed through found object assemblages on largely women's clothing and accessories. And she uses a lot of other found objects also. But what she tries to convey is particularly female issues such as body image, vanity, and womanly wisdom passed down through the generations. This is made from dolls from all over the world. Lastly, this is one of my own pieces made from a discarded flower pot wheel called The Freaks Ride the Ferris Wheel. I too am untrained, and I find it enormously satisfying to work with found object because it's the object that inspires the art which springs from it. And the pursuit to make that piece sing, or at least say something, is very exciting. It's a constraint, but it adds this exhilarating challenge to each piece. The flower pot wheel just called out to be a Ferris wheel, and the trophy wife, the misogynist, the homophobe, the bigot, the animal hater, the religious fundamentalist, these are my definition of freaks. I make them from hand-built armatures, which I then cover with glass seed beads in peyote stitch, one bead at a time. So of course, there are many millions more of artists like those I've shown you today that prove to us in sublime, evocative ways that much of the stuff we've deemed trash is actually a valuable resource. They remind us that abundance exists right here in our communities, and we need only make that abundance available in the form of reuse centers to make a difference. A difference in less greenhouse gas emissions from landfills, in less CO2 emissions from cross-country product deliveries, a difference in lack of school and nonprofit resources, in green jobs, and in that deeply felt need of humanity to make. So let's start treating this resource the way plastic utensil artist Sayat Gans was taught to when she was growing up in Japan. She was deeply influenced by Japanese Shinto belief that all organisms and objects have spirits, and that objects discarded before the end of their usefulness weep in the trash bin. Give that some thought the next time you throw out something useful, and ponder what you can do, or what artist you could share it with, to prolong the spirit and usefulness of that thing. Thank you.